Okay. Welcome to our webinar today titled The History and Challenges of Gambling in the Military. My name is Robbie Fuquay, and I will be both your host and presenter today. This webinar is actually brought to you by the state of Illinois, the Illinois Department of Human Services, and they also sponsor the Illinois Problem Gambling Helpline um, that we actually operate at Morneau Chappelle. And we provide crisis counseling and referral services to state funded and private practitioners for problem gamblers and their loved ones. There's the number for 1-800 Gambler. And if you would take note of my contact information there, my number and my email. If you have any questions, of course, you can contact me there. A little bit about myself. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, licensed in the great state of Illinois. I'm also licensed in Massachusetts as an LICSW, and I am the program manager and training manager or training specialist for the responsible gambling department at Morneau Chappelle. My background includes crisis work actually in a hospital setting. Of course, work in the addictions field. I've got my MSW at Boston College. And I actually started with this company when we were BDA. I started as a clinical associate answering our problem gambling helplines across several states, including the state of Illinois. Of course, had a caseload with the Illinois C2C program, which is our Call to Change program, which was a phone counseling program. Yeah, that's a little bit about myself. Please make note of my contact information, a little bit more on Morneau Chappelle and what we do as far as responsible gambling services and training services. We carry out a few different types of services with our trainings. We manage the problem gambling helplines for several different states, including Illinois, as I said before, and we provide trainings like this webinar to both providers and retailers. We do prevention programming, research, and white paper, and we work with GameSense and do responsible gaming information centers globally. So that's a little bit about what we do here at Morneau Chappelle and how we work with the Illinois Department of Human Services. But now I want to talk to you a little bit about our upcoming training schedule, which we are very excited about. Before I even get into this, please note weknowthefeeling.org. That is the website where you go to see where all the upcoming training events are listed and are at, and you can register for. Now, when you go to weknowthefeeling.org, go under the tab for providers. That's for FOR, for providers. Click on that tab. Then you're going to see it's very simple. It's just on your screen. You're going to see on the left side these 4-day core workshops that we are offering, and let's start with those. You can register for these on those, and you have all the location information and the dates. And again, you can just click on it and register. We will be in Springfield, and we are happy to announce that Dr. David Ledgerwood is helping us out here, and he's going to be conducting a couple of these as well. He's a world-leading researcher in problem gambling, and he did our last webinar last week, which was great, on impulsivity and problem gambling. But he'll be in Springfield on the University of Illinois Springfield campus there on April 28th, 29th, May 6th, and 7th. I will then be in Mount Vernon at the Wren Lake College location on May 12th, 13th, 19th, and 20th. Then Dr. Ledgerwood, again, will be on the UIC campus in downtown Chicago, where we just completed our last class in February on May 26th, 27th, 28th, and 29th. And I will then be in Bloomington and Springfield in a very busy month for me, conducting 2 4-day courses. In Bloomington, we're going to be at Chestnut Health Systems on June 4th, 5th, 8th, and 9th. And then I'll be in Springfield at the University of Illinois Springfield campus, June 18th, 19th, 25th, and 26th. A little bit about this course and this class. It used to be a 5-day course. We combined the curriculum into 4 days to save you a day. It is good for 30 CEU credits. It meets the educational CEU credit that ILDAPCA has listed as an educational requirement. So if you sit in all 4 days with this class, get your 30 CEUs, that will meet the educational requirement. That is one of the intentions of this course. The other intention of this course is we want to prepare you for the PCGC test. Now, this is not an actual test prep course per se, But after you sit in 4 days with either Dr. Ledgerwood or I, you should be in better shape to pass the exam. So that's the 4-day courses that we're offering, 5 more. And on the right side of your screen at weknowthefeeling.org, you're going to see our webinar schedule. These are webinars that we've done and that we're actually doing. My apologies. I think we have one in between April 26th and 21st. I think we might have another Dr. Ledgerwood, but check weknowthefeeling.org. We've got everything listed there. Today we're going to be talking on veterans and gambling, actually a history and challenges of gambling in the military. But I do know Julie Hines will be speaking on gambling, gaming, and young adults on March 26th. And April 21st, I'll be doing suicide problem gambling and gambling disorder. And I believe in between the 26th and the 21st, there might be another one. I think it might be April 6th, Dr. Ledgerwood, but check weknowthefeeling.org. Again, my apologies, but you can, again, register for these as well. And all these courses are good for, the webinars are good for one CEU. That you can use it however you wish. And the CEUs, by the way, the 30 with the 4-day course here can be used either way, but it can be used towards obtaining your, PCGC certification. Now, if you have any more questions about the PCGC certification, you can ask me, but I will tell you those questions I can't answer. Go to IODAPCA. They are the source, the resource, the certification resource for our state. So I would go to their website, give them a call. They're great. They'll call you right back. I know they do with me. If you have any questions regarding the certification, but feel free to reach out to me too. If I can answer it, I will. Okay, so that's a little bit about weknowthefeeling.org and all our training events coming up. Now I want to set up today's call, as I do on all the ones where I present, because I want to talk to you about what's coming down the landscape of gambling in Illinois, which is one of the reasons you're getting all these great trainings. So currently there's 4 main types of legal gambling. Gambling's not just limited to casinos here in Illinois. There's 10 casinos, maybe 11 now if the Hard Rock has gone up in Rockford, but there are plans to have 6 more. I'm going to tell you about that here in a minute. We also, of course, have the Illinois Lottery. We have, as far as video gaming and gambling machines, the most out of any state in America. That includes Nevada. We have the most video independent or standalone gambling machines in the state that you see everywhere, right? Stores, bars, gas stations, and then of course we have racetrack betting that you can do too. Now, the reason we like to show, or I like to show, the different types of gambling in Illinois is to better prepare the Illinois counselors and clinicians on the line. If you're new to problem gambling or gambling disorder and treating this population, you're going to want to know what the different types or avenues are. You're also going to want to know what's coming too, right? Even if you're in the field, and you probably know about all this legislation that went down a few months ago. And on top of the 4 actually legalized gambling ways that you can gamble in Illinois, there's a 5th option, and the bill's already been passed. So any day now, you'll be able to legally bet on sports in the state of Illinois. So that's your 5th legal option now in Illinois to gamble. Now, there are also, with this legislation, came plans to expand 6 additional casinos on top of the 10 that we already have. I know there's always been talk about a casino downtown in Chicago. I think that's still underway, and then the Rockford, Hard Rock that I believe, if it's not up, it's going up pretty quickly here, and then others. So there's going to be 6 additional, and then also there are going to be a combination of racetracks and casinos that the term is racino. There are plans underway to combine the existing racetracks, a few of them here in the state of Illinois, and combine those with casinos. So that, with the growth of the electronic gambling and gaming machine, and legalized gambling and more casinos, this is the very reason why the Illinois Department of Human Services is providing an increased training effort to better prepare you, to prepare us, Illinois counselors and clinicians, to be able to meet the potential demand of folks in the state of Illinois that might experience problematic gambling behaviors triggered by the overall legalized gambling options. Okay, so that's why. And I'd like to take this time too to thank the Illinois Department of Human Services for providing these trainings for free. I can't tell you how many calls. My phone was just going off, and I'm sure it might have been someone um, in Illinois asking me, well, how much does this cost? Well, it's free. So I'd like to thank the Illinois Department of Human Services for providing our clinicians um, for all the 4 days and the webinars at no cost. Okay. So let's set up for today's topic, the history and challenges of gambling in the military. Now we're going to look at how gambling and problem gambling has played out in the U.S. military over the years, including how the U.S. has, the military has actually played somewhat of a role in the complex relationship. And that's exactly what has developed over the years, is a complex relationship with gambling. Starting with, we're going to talk about the history of gambling in the U.S. With gambling in the military. Specifically, we're going to talk about how slot machines were provided to our servicemen and women, are provided to our servicemen and women overseas, and how that kind of developed um, um, over the years and how it's played out over time. We're going to talk about where the money goes from these slot machines and the challenges that the military has faced to keep them available to active duty military members. We're then going to review some prevalence rates of gambling, problem gambling in the military, and compare some of those rates to the general uh, public's prevalence rates on problem gambling. We'll discuss why it's pretty common for active military personnel to gamble while deployed away from home, and also when returning home. We're going to detail some potential reasons, circumstances, and characteristics of active duty military connected to problem gambling behaviors in veterans as well. Then we're going to do, well, as I said, the same with the veterans, but we're going to see some slight differences. There are a whole lot of obvious vulnerabilities with both populations to problem gambling, gambling disorder, and other addictions, but we're going to talk about a couple of differences as well, okay? Because with veterans and active duty members, they're oftentimes in different phases of their lives, obvious different phases of their military careers. So we're going to talk about that and how that plays into addiction. And then we also, in the final segment of this session, we're going to talk about all the challenges and concerns that go into treating military personnel. We're going to focus more on the active duty than the veterans here. And while we're not going to get detailed with specific clinical treatment techniques, we will be listing things to prepare you if you happen to have a military client or someone in the military come into your office for help. Now, as always, some of this might serve as a review, or better yet, it might be new helpful information for you and your private practices and the agencies you work in. But either way, I hope this information is going to give you perspective and give you knowledge to better serve problem gambling clients as we face all these new legal options that are coming to our state, right, as we speak. Now, as in the past and as we did last week and the week before, you know, if you've sat in on one of my trainings, it usually goes the full hour. I'm going to be checking chats. And if I can't get to your chats, we will email you the answers. And if I don't know the answer, I may not know the answer to the question, we'll get you, again, via email. Now, if I can move through the material pretty quickly, I'll try to do what, our two speakers before me did. Maybe we can have a couple of minutes for questions. Just chat me again. And I can either let you, you're muted because we want to cut down the background noise, but if we can unmute you, we can do that. Or I can just answer the question via chat. So, and if you have any questions, of course, shoot me a question. But it looks like I've got a chat. Let me take a quick look here. It looks like Molly's screen is all black. So I hope, Molly, you were able to see my screen now, because I've got the share function on. And also, guys, we record all of our webinars. So this webinar will not be an exception. So it will be recorded and on probably by next week. Okay. So without further ado, let's talk about our learning objectives. We are going to learn the 6 reasons why gambling is common amongst military personnel during deployment times. We're going to learn the 2 reasons gambling is common amongst military personnel when they return home. We're going to know the 3 vulnerable characteristics of active duty military members for developing problem behaviors. We are going to know the 3 vulnerable characteristics of veterans for developing problem gambling behaviors, and we're going to know the 4 treatment considerations when treating military personnel with gambling disorder. Okay. Okay. So I just got the other chat. So I went back to the learning objectives. And again, guys, if you miss any of this, go to weknowthefeeling.org. I sound like a commercial, don't I? I sound like a radio personality. weknowthefeeling.org. We'll have this recorded version on next week, if not earlier. Okay, so in this front section, oh, and again, before I do get started, remember we'll have, in order to get your CEU today, you know, you've got to be seated in on this full session, and we're going to have 3 polling questions, and we're just a couple of slides away from our first polling question that you'll be participating in. But in this section, we're going to talk about military and how it's and how they provided the placement of slot machines and where they've provided them, you know, in the world. Just not here. Actually, there's not any stateside right now. They're all off of the continent of the US or the North America continent, but we'll talk about that. So let's start off with 1931, and you may or may not know the story, but looking for a way to stimulate the economy, the Nevada legislature legalized gambling in 1931. So by, you know, maybe way of circumstance, also in 1931, slot machines started appearing domestically and overseas on military bases. The machines were banned in 1951. And don't worry, this goes back and forth for a few decades with them being banned and them opening them back up. But with the help of the Federal Transportation of Gambling Devices Act in 1951, it was also known as the Johnson Act. This act prohibited gambling machines to be transported across lines to any place that prohibited the lawful operation of these machines. Now, this legislature at the time, or no, this legislature of the time and over the years has been amended, and it's been molded since 1951, but it basically sparked the overall removal of these machines because there's been a few scandals that I'll talk about, but the slot machines made a resurgence in the 1960s to generate money for the MWR programs. Now, if I have military personnel or veterans on, you probably know what the MWR programs are. If you don't know what they are, I had to research this myself because I'm not a military person, but it's the morale, welfare, and recreation programs, okay? Basically, they support readiness by providing a variety of community, soldier, and family support programs, activities, and all types of services. But they've been a revenue generator since the 1960s. But, you know, in 1965, again, gambling was banned again on domestic U.S. bases, on bases in the U.S. And since the 70s, slot machines have been permitted on U.S. military bases, just mainly in the Pacific and Europe. Now, they were removed again from Army and Air Force bases, and I think this was off the continent, of course, but after more than a dozen people were court-martialed for skimming cash from slot machines in Southeast Asia, and that was during the Vietnam War era. 1,500 machines remained, though, on Navy and Marine Corps bases overseas. And in 1980, the Army and Air Force began restoring these machines at many overseas bases. Again, it wasn't domestic. According to the military, now, I've got a few reports on this, and my apologies, but on this one, it says there was over 4,000. I've got another report that says just over 3,000. Modern video slot machines. Either way, that's a lot of EGMs, right? Serving the military. Now, these machines used to be allowed on stateside basis, and again, stateside means here in the continental U.S. But after a public scandal involving the suicide of 2 airmen with gambling problems, they were removed stateside way back decades ago. Now, poker games have always been popular and they've flourished on bases, but there's been regulations on them, and they've been kind of like vague regulations. They're called like social games, and I say that with quotations, similar to that in the civilian war world. Now, interestingly, gambling has been prohibited between people of different rank in the military. And if you've served in the military, you probably know about this rule. The military doesn't like to have a situation where a private owes a general money or vice versa. So they kind of shy away from all this. Now, here's the current picture again. This one, you know, this one's stating, and I believe this is correct, there's just over, 3,000 slot machines as of July 2016, mostly in Japan, the Republic of Korea, and in Germany. Now, each armed services runs its own program and is responsible for where that money goes and how they allocate it. For instance, the Navy recycles all gambling revenues into individual overseas bases for programs and new construction, while the Army, Marines, and Air Force, they send about half of that money, half of their revenue back stateside here to the continental U.S. Here's kind of my beef with it. You know, we're gambling neutral. I'm gambling neutral. If you've sat in on any of the 4-day courses that I instruct or any of the workshops, I say I'm gambling neutral. But I think if we're going to legalize it and present options to something like gambling, I think there should be monies dedicated to fund prevention, education, treatment. But as far as I know, there is none from the military that goes specifically to those areas. Now, in 1 year, 5,435 slot machines generated $184 million in profits for the MWR programs. If the average percent of profits to the MWR programs is 6%, then gamblers put more than $3.1 billion into military slot machines each year. What does that tell us? That tells us they're being used, right? And looking at this chart, the Army has the most machines globally. Again, this one's quoting the numbers a little bit higher. At 3,275, bringing in 124 million and providing the largest percentage of their profits to the MWR programs at 7%, followed by the Air Force with 1,202 machines, bringing in 28.2 million, providing just 3% of their profits to the MWR programs. So to recap this section before we move on to our next session, the military has seen its share of challenges, wouldn't you say, providing active military members a form of recreation that is apparently providing them with a lucrative revenue stream that feeds each of the 4 branches in the morale and welfare and recreation programs. But as we're going to see in the next 2 sections of this talk, the availability of these gambling machines also pose as a potential threat and hazard for, our active military out, on duty. That brings us to our first poll question. So I'm going to launch this first poll. Whoops, excuse me. And it's a true or false question. And it asks, I just went over this. Slot machines generate revenue for the MWR programs in the U.S. military, the morale, welfare, and recreation programs. Is this true or false? Slot machines generate revenue for the morale, welfare, and recreation programs in the military. So we got a lot of people answering. Hold on, Cheryl. I see that you've raised your hand. We've got 30 of 35 still answering. I will give it 5-10 more seconds. Usually when I get questions during a poll question, that means someone's having a hard time answering it. If that's the case, you can email the answer to me, rfuquay@morneauchappelle.com. Yep, but you should be able to click here. Okay, guys, it's true. Slot machines generate revenue for morale, welfare, and recreation programs in the U.S. military. So again, it's true. Okay, good job for everybody that answered. I think there were a couple that answered false. It was kind of posed as, look, it's a revenue generator for all branches, including the MWR. And I believe the MWR is operated by the Army. If you're a veteran, maybe you can tell me if that's true or not. But yeah, so, okay, so I've had several people raise their hands and ask me questions. Let's see what we got. Can't register my answer, and then, okay, good, Cheryl. Yeah, you guys, you know what you can do is if you can't register your answer, those who did this, just answer it by question and answer. Go like you're going to answer or ask me a question, and then just put the answer there. Good job. Thanks, Cheryl and Nicholas. Okay, and then there was a hand raised as well, but I got to keep moving, guys. Okay, good job on our first polling question. So let's move into gambling in the military, and we're going to talk a little bit about veterans, and we're going to talk a little bit about active duty. Now, here's some obvious reasons why gambling in the military is common when both active members are deployed and then when they return home. We've just learned from the previous section, I just said that there are literally thousands of machines placed on bases worldwide, not to mention card games and other avenues to bet during, downtime. Now, even if personnel isn't deployed for war, it's still very high risk and stressful for our young military members because they are in foreign lands away from their home for the very first times in their lives a lot of the time. So gambling can help relieve them of this fear and anxiety of being away from home, especially where they're going. They might connect a particular gambling game with feelings of being back home. For instance, Texas Hold'em, or any type of particular type or brand of slot machine or electronic gaming machine that reminds them of home, and they kind of build a connection with that machine. And then you have boredom and isolation from your family and friends and home, right? With these electronic gambling machines. So a lot of these active duty young members kind of bond with these machines, if you will, kind of like what you see in casinos. Now, the machines, obviously, I mean, of course, they're fun and they definitely appear as innocent and a logical option to pass the time until they return home. And by the time they return home, a lot of folks acquire a taste for gambling, and it then becomes a fun and exciting way to fill a void because often there are reintegration issues that come with coming back home to the States after being deployed. And if there's a genetic predisposition to addiction, or they face some ugly things in war, then the table might be set for the condition to progress, into problem gambling or gambling disorder, especially with all the different ways to gamble in our nation now, just not in Illinois, but all the states are passing a lot of legislation, or seems to be, especially with the sports gambling issue. Now, studies suggest that most at-risk categories in developing problem gambling are young, unmarried men, which describes the majority of military members, especially Marines. Now, we also know that there are some very strong women in the military, in the Marines as well, but we know that men still pretty much are the majority. And after agreeing to risk their lives, men and women, to risk their lives in combat, our military service members don't feel that rolling the dice for like their mortgage monthly payment is a big deal. So how does that translate? Well, that translates to 36,000 to 48,000 active duty members perhaps have experienced a gambling problem. That's roughly 7% of military personnel. And veterans show a 2% lifetime prevalence rate, which is double that of the prevalence rates of the general population. Now, this, of course, reflects the times that the study was written a few years ago, but it still, I think, is relevant because it reflects the fact that the population, the veterans in the military population, is higher than that, generally speaking, of the of the general public. A few more things. I just said this. Research suggests that the rate of problem gambling is higher amongst that of the general population. 10% of veterans using veteran treatment services have problem or compulsive gambling behaviors. And among veterans hospitalized in inpatient psychiatric units, 40% had some form of gambling problem. Okay. Now, as we said, or as I said on the previous slide, generally speaking, the profile of active duty military pretty well match up with those risk factors consistent with a large portion of problem gamblers, especially among those listed in the Marine Corps, mostly males, younger, competitive, risk takers, and also the higher number of those with ethnic backgrounds, because the higher prevalence rates of problem gambling connected to this category. That's where it all kind of matches up here. And there is something to be said regarding alcohol and gambling when connecting all these factors as well. the risk taking, the experimentation combined with the need to escape or fit in, with the impaired judgment and poor decision making that comes with, being intoxicated on alcohol. It can be a very deadly combination. And in fact, I know the NESARC study from a few years ago stated that alcohol use disorder was the highest, that rated the highest comorbid rate with problem gambling, or gambling disorder, excuse me. Okay, so let's first start with active duty. I'm going to talk about active duty vulnerabilities, and then I'm going to talk about veteran vulnerabilities as it's pertaining to problem gambling behaviors and gambling disorder. Okay, so let's look a little bit deeper into these characteristics and traits of active duty military men and women that puts them somewhat at risk for these problematic behaviors. First off, acceptability. Hey, look, it's not drinking or doing drugs, right? It's just a game. We're going to just make this card game a little bit more interesting, making it $10, $20 a hand. Seems harmless and it seems innocent enough to pass the time with no one getting hurt. So it seems it can turn into a problem, right? For many of our young men and women in the active duty service, this is the first time, as I said before, in their young lives that they're away from home and they have a larger amount of discretionary income to spend on whatever they want. Because as the military pays them, their expenses are pretty much covered, right? So they seem to have some extra money to spend. And as far as accessibility goes, we've covered all the thousands of slot machines, the history behind this, and also remember all the other options to exercise, namely those numerous card games that go down during downtime amongst, their fellow platoon and fellow soldiers and bunkmates. Now, most of our active military are at the age of where they are very competitive, late teens, early 20s. A lot of them are males, and I think that comes with the territory of what they signed up for, namely the Marine Corps, as I've said before. They're natural risk takers by definition, and I do mean literally those that sign up to risk their lives for our country will almost naturally gravitate to this element of risk that gambling can bring them. Uh, if you don't know what the hurry up and wait mentality is, it's simply just part of military life, especially at war. It's where you set up and do daily drills to prepare you for war and battle with nothing that actually ends at the end of the drill. Um, but this is how they stay prepared and ready for battle, even when they aren't actually fighting. But think about this daily routine, not knowing if at the end of this you're going to be getting shot at. So this hurry up and wait mentality wears on our active duty military folks. And gambling can serve that as a fun stress reliever to get them out of that flight or fight that the hurry up wait mentality brings upon. Boredom, depending on the assignment, and a lot of times there could be a lot of downtime, and remember it can be a lot of downtime around slot machines, right? And in regards to untreated mental health problems, I'm just not talking about, we are talking about PTSD, but also any mood disorder, anything or addiction that might have its onset in the late teens, early 20s. Remember that the age that we're dealing with here, late teens and early 20s, this is the time that many mental health disorders can start to show up and can be triggered, especially by some traumatic events that war brings about, right? And at that age, they really don't have the life experience or education or parents around or other loved ones to point out some things, or for them to actually realize that they may not be feeling right. And what they're feeling is not just singing the blues, but a symptom of major depressive disorder, for instance. So they may have some mental health conditions that have gone undiagnosed because they are just now coming up while they're away from home. And when we talk about escape and loneliness, gambling can definitely serve as that fun option to pass the time, and that's what the slot machines are there for, the EGMs. So, and then, the financial independence piece is something that we already covered. It's the first time with large sums of money that they're away from home. And again, they're around these slot machines and all these other options. So this brings us to our first case example. Senior Airman Lanyana Tanel. She is quoted as saying that she started gambling while she was in South Korea and in the mid 90s, but her addiction intensified in 2000 when she was deployed to Iceland, where it was dark, cold, and very boring, right? She gambled away $40,000. She wrote bad checks, $50,000 in bad checks on the base. She was ultimately court-martialed for fraud and put on suicide watch, was threatened with hard labor, the brig, and demotion. You know, it didn't really matter that she asked for help for her addiction. While she avoided jail, she was ultimately demoted and then discharged from the Air Force. Very sad story. But our next case study is even sadder. It's tragic. But before we go to that case, let's look at what those vulnerabilities that match up with veterans look like. Now, again, a lot of these are really similar, but there's some differences too. Now, although active duty military members share many of these same vulnerabilities to gambling behaviors, there are the differences that I was speaking on. Now, one important note that I found from a journal that I resourced for this when I added to this was that the most important thing to realize, is that the reactions from veterans or returning active duty, when they overreact to something, it's actually a product of their combat survival skills and protective reflexes that were not well controlled after coming home. The volume was never turned down, and this can create the context as I speak through, these vulnerabilities. For instance, poor impulse control, pain from traumatic memories and war experiences can definitely lead to impulsivity issues, to either feel better or as a response or reaction to something that it might come as gambling away their mortgage, for instance. It might give them relief, thinking that they might win, perhaps, or it might be an escape thing. When we talk about grieving, gambling losses can accentuate losses and trigger depressive symptoms, which can then turn dangerous for a veteran gambler. So we need to keep an eye out for this connection and those symptoms as they relate to gambling losses. Now, the belief in luck or specialness can be kind of linked to if they survived war and battle. A lot of times, you probably know if you've worked with veterans, there's some guilt involved there, but there's also, there might be, they feel that they live to tell about it, so that it might be that belief that they can use perhaps as an unhealthy motivator towards gambling behaviors, that, hey, they made it through war, they could get lucky at gambling, and this can become an actual distortion. So with careful questioning, I think we need to assess for these connections, as they might again become some dangerous distortions. And I talked about this earlier, but of course, veterans can become escape gamblers, trying to get away from those horrible memories of what happened on the battlefield. And when our veterans are challenged with reintegrating back into our society, we will undoubtedly, which will undoubtedly, hopefully happen. They will feel that they have a lack of purpose a lot of times, which in turn will lower their self-esteem, and the hopelessness will then try to creep in. So we need to be supportive and even play coach in supporting them in their everyday life in every way with their reintegration efforts into their homes, into their communities, and to help them maintain a positive self-esteem. Oftentimes, it's hard for veterans to utilize their experiences, skills that they developed while in active military life, and to the communities and cities back to where they're returning to. So we have to be mindful of this and help them with applying their skills that they develop in the military, perhaps using some of our strength-based therapy approaches to assist them in their reintegration efforts versus going and gambling all their money away, right? And when we speak about comfort and being emotionally numb, we basically touched on what we talked about when we escaped, when veterans try to escape these traumatic things and memories from war. So of course that can come into play, and a lot of times our veterans want to just numb out, So here's the second case, the tragic one that involves Warrant Officer Aaron Walsh. I don't know if you saw this on the news, if you sat in on our 4-day core, I believe I cover this, but it made national news a few years back, and for tragic reasons. He was a decorated Army Apache helicopter pilot. He developed a gambling addiction while he was in Seoul, South Korea, where he spent up to $20,000 in 1 year. He tried to get treatment several times, but unsuccessfully. He actually went AWOL in 2005, before he could be court-martialed, and he ended up homeless in the streets of Las Vegas. He ended up committing suicide, leaving his wife and 2 young children in 2006 at the young age of 34. And Kerry Walsh of CNN said, hey, the military has this culture that they take care of their own, but it seems from this, they just profited from his addiction and threw him away. So, you know, this is the most worst and extreme example of gambling disorder in the military. And even out of the military, the suicide rate is probably the highest among all addictions. We talk about that. That's one of the reasons we do what we do here at Morneau Shapell, partnering up with the Illinois Department of Human Services. It's nasty. And when you combine that with someone who has been in the military and has seen some bad things and is suffering from PTSD, then, you know, we as counselors and clinicians, we need to be mindful of this. We need to advocate for our veterans and our active duty military who suffer from this condition. You know, because oftentimes with this condition, it's comorbid. You know, it's the exception really versus the rule is that it's a standalone. It's usually comorbid with another addiction or a mood disorder. But if in your military, it's a high probability that it's comorbid with either PTSD or some type of you know, trauma that they've faced. So that gets me to the poll question number 2, guys. We're making our way through this. Let me launch this. For some reason, I'm having problems with this today. Here we are. Okay, so I'm going to go back. Okay, poll question number 2, and I am launching it now. And it's a multiple choice. You should see it on your screen, guys. And it asks, active duty military may be vulnerable to gambling behaviors due to what? Is it A, acceptability of gambling activities, that it's an acceptable form of recreation? Or is it B, the competitive nature of an active duty military man or woman? Or is it the loneliness that comes with military for C? Or is it D, all the above? So I'll give you a few minutes. Again, which of these are the following? Multiple choice. Active duty military may be vulnerable due to A, it's acceptable, B, their competitive nature, C, loneliness, or D, all the above. Okay. I'll wait about 15 more seconds. And if you guys can't answer or launch these, just answer in the questions like Cheryl and I believe Nicholas did. Or if you got my email address, email me. Okay. So I'm going to end polling, and it is D, all the above. All these things is acceptable, the competitive nature of folks in the military, and it's, you know, the loneliness that's involved. Okay. All right. Okay. How are we doing with chats? Okay, we're clear. Okay, so let's talk about the last piece of what we're going to be speaking on, and it's actually treatment considerations. Okay, with, you know, I'm going to talk about both, but we're going to kind of focus on active military. But of course, as I said, there's some overlapping vulnerabilities with veterans and active duty. I mean, most of them are overlapping, right? Because they're the same. They're just different phases, right? Active duty to veterans, but they're usually at different times and phases of their life and obviously of their careers. Now, the first 3 of these considerations more pertain to active duty, and they seem to interact and relate to each other, starting with shame that often comes with a gambling disorder. Because of that's even with the general population, right? Because of the money thing, and it's just a game versus a substance. But because of the major financial damage that's connected to an activity that's not even supposed to be an addiction or a disease, and because of all the circumstances and the military environment itself that we've discussed so far, shame is intensified even more with our active duty and veterans, which leads us to the, you know, the secrecy and confidentiality issues that are tied to the fear of being found out or coming out as someone who has gambling disorder. So a lot of times active duty members, they suffer from this, and it doesn't come out, right? A lot of times they're worried about their operational readiness and their military careers in general. I'm going to talk about that here in a minute. And I get that. They don't want to come forward because they want to make sure that, they don't want to threaten or jeopardize their military career. So the result of these fears translates into secrecy and the concerns of coming forward to receive the help that they need, and the fear of being demoted or discharged. In addition to their career fears, they also don't want to be viewed as a weak link in their platoon or their team amongst their fellow soldiers. It's kind of like a locker room mentality, similar to athletes that have suffered an injury in a team sport. They don't want to lose the confidence from their fellow teammates. In my EAP experience, I always saw this too in firehouses with firemen or emergency responders across the nation that suffer from, like, a mental health condition like a mood disorder or even trauma that they saw that they just couldn't shake. They didn't want any of their fellow firemen to view them as the weak link on the team. They wanted to continue to be out there serving and working. So they will naturally have a confidentiality concern when or if they come forward for help. And as mentioned, comorbidity should be expected when we work with military personnel. So we really need to assess strongly and be prepared to treat these conditions, and, in addition to the problem gambling behaviors. So remember, when we deal with Marines and other veterans, if you do already, that have actual combat experience, that have seen some bad things, they will undoubtedly be risk takers, overconfident, sensation seeking. And, one source that I found, I know I looked and added to what we had in our library, but veterans in treatment for PTSD may be as much as 60 times more likely to have a gambling problem as age-matched members of the general population. This makes sense, right? Just looking for some relief from that traumatic memory from what happened on the battlefield. So going back to our comorbidity consideration, veterans suffering from PTSD are at risk for problem gambling behaviors, and that tells us obviously that we need to assess for this condition. If someone comes in because of PTSD or some memories they're trying to shake, from war, we need to be asking and assessing, doing even a quick screen if they're gambling. Um, Depression rates of veterans seeking treatment reportedly as high as 76%. 40% of veterans seeking help have reported suicide attempts. Now, these numbers tell us that we really need to keep our eye out for the warning signs of suicide ideation and to regularly, consistently assess for crisis. The veteran's mental health profile combined with the problem gambling behaviors and the suicide rates with just the general population is, it's a deadly combination. So knowing these numbers, we must have our, crisis clinician hats on, if you will, and be ready and to be asking those questions. Um, it's a third leading cause of death. 243 of 1.4 million take their own lives. And studies report that out of the 80 participants in this one study that I found, 35 experienced suicide ideation. So we have to be mindful of this. Again, the combination of things. I see that you raised your hand there, Marie. The studies that reported almost half are suffering from suicide ideation. Oh, let me see if I can get to you, Marie. Okay, I'm going to try to loop back around and answer that question that you had on suicide. But what I want to say here is gambling disorder, standalone without, even if they're not military personnel, we need to be careful because of the high suicide rates. When you mix in PTSD and some of the horrible things that an active duty member or a veteran has seen in the past, and they're suffering from those symptoms, it can be a deadly combination. So we have to make sure that we're asking the questions and assessing properly when these folks come into our agencies. Okay, so now I'm in no way going to try to talk about or detail anything regarding traumatic brain injury or TBI. I'm not experienced or authorized to speak on the subject, but we do want to make note of it. And we want to make sure that we ask about it and refer appropriately if your gambling veteran or active military comes into your agency or your office, experienced combat while in active duty. We need to ensure that our veteran is being checked by a physician. because TBI, actually what it is, it's when a blow or a jolt to the head briefly knocks them out, causes a temporary gap in your memory and makes you confused or disoriented. Brain scans will look normal because of the plasticity of the brain and how it can heal, which is great, but it looks like it's fine physically in a scan, but a lot of times it's still not. When systems persist, they are indistinguishable from the physiological effects of active duty. So again, we definitely want to ask those questions to see if they suffered from TBI, if they ever had any blows to the head in battle or any physical confrontations. And we definitely want to, the moral of the story or the moral of the slide is get a physician involved if that has been the case. Now, this here talks about overcoming stigma. And per our earlier discussion, it's very challenging for our veterans and active duty members to come forward with their gambling problems for several reasons. And the stigma of mental health conditions is a big component of their challenge. Now, many in the military are very concerned that they will be perceived as weak or treated differently, and they are concerned that we as their therapists or counselors will judge them or not be able to understand them or connect with them regarding what they're suffering from. So I believe that rapport and connecting with our military and veteran clients during the early phases of the therapeutic relationship is a very, very important. We have to try to make that connection. It may take sessions to build that trust and build that rapport to where we can get that trust so we can perhaps help them, trudge through what they're suffering from. We have to be patient and be mindful of this challenge. So this was a survey done. There were several questions posed for two different types of groups of men and women within the same unit pertaining to barriers of mental health treatment connected to the stigma that I've been talking about over the past 50 so minutes, right? The first group of folks suffered from PTSD or depression, while the second set of personnel within the same unit did not report symptoms. So let's look at this. So they asked veterans with a mental or with a behavioral health condition and those without. So I don't trust mental health professionals. 38% of those suffering from depression or PTSD said they don't trust, versus just 17% of veterans that aren't suffering from any, behavioral health issues. So the ones who needed help, they have more mistrust than the veterans who don't. I don't know where to get help. 22% of those suffering from depression or PTSD say that they didn't know where to get help, where 6% of the same that aren't suffering from a mood disorder or PTSD say they didn't know where to get help. Most of them knew where to go. It would be too embarrassing. 41% with a condition said yes. Just 18% without said yes. I would be seen as weak. 65% of the veterans with PTSD or depression said, they don't want to be seen as weak, where 31%, just 31% of those who don't suffer from a condition said they wouldn't want to be seen as weak. And then our mental health care doesn't work. 25% of those suffering from depression and PTSD within the same unit of those that don't suffer said, they don't think it works, or what our work doesn't work, where just 9% of the veterans who don't suffer from any behavioral health issues, reported issues anyways, say it doesn't help. So that's telling, right? Those barriers are stronger amongst those who need the help versus those who don't. Now, as I covered earlier, active duty military, experience a conflict of interest regarding available help and official military readiness due to operational readiness. And when we say operational or military readiness, what we mean is that an individual in active duty is competent and able for battle or to do their job, whatever that might be. So they are afraid that the disclosure of them having a problem with gambling or any other mental health concern might either hurt or end their military career, or they may get a discharge of any type. It's a dilemma, and it creates a lot more stress on the military personnel to come forward for help. Now, as I said in the opening, we work with different states. In North Carolina, I worked with a couple of veterans on a big presentation, and they were my guest speakers, and they said all of that is true. And they said this operational readiness. And I work with folks who work at the VA I've had them in the 4-day course, and they all concur with this. So it's a big challenge, right? So finally, this leaves us to our last polling question. Whoops. And it states, let me get to it. Another true false. It asks, true or false, confidentiality, shame, secrecy, and comorbidity should be considered when treating active duty military for mental health issues. Is that true or is that false? Confidentiality, shame, secrecy, and comorbidity all should be considered when treating active duty military for mental health issues. True or false? Boy, a lot of you guys are voting really quick. Thank you. Because I have 5 minutes and I want to go over this next screen for you. I'll give you 10 more seconds. Well, if you haven't answered yet, the answer is true. You should know this one, right? Confidentiality, shame, secrecy, and comorbidity should be considered when treating active duty military for mental health issues. And that goes for veterans too. Okay, so before we get to the end here, I've got 4 minutes. This is a slide I added actually for California, and I wanted to keep this in for you guys because, you know, it's a more recent, I know it's 2018, but it's, you know, it's a former provision written into the National Defense Authorization Act of 2018 that came into action by President. He signed it, President Trump signed it. While the major focus of this was growing the military by investing heavily in planes, ships, and tanks, Senator Elizabeth Warren fought for this to include a provision on requiring, uh, you know, requiring all military personnel to be screened for gambling disorder. She based this, and this is what's important. She advocated her efforts because she saw the results of a 2017 government accountability report, or the government accountability report in 2017. She said, "Hey, this is a problem. We need to start screening military personnel." So she fought this, and I got to give it, you know, President Trump signed off on it. So the both sides of the aisle, for once, work together. Or it used to happen all the time, but it's a rare occurrence now. But that's a great thing. So um, there should be active military personnel should be getting screened for gambling, problem gambling, and gambling disorder. So let me take a look here. I've got 3 minutes. I wanted to review, but I'm going to check real quickly on what we have for questions. And I think, let me see if I can find, okay, here we got a chat. Okay, this is from Marie. Aren't unit leaders being informed about the issues regarding gambling suicide rate for the active military? You know, Marie, I'm not sure. You know, that's why we do what we do. The suicide rates, you know, for gambling disorder alone, for the general population are dangerous. And then when you mix in the active military, that's why this act that I just covered was Senator Warren fought for that. I've got another question here from someone else. So I've got 2 minutes. Sorry, guys. Oh, hold on. This is from Ellen. What are the chances military are really being screened? Very good question. Because I got that question from, if you mind me saying, well, I'll say your first name, Marie. Your concerns were they're not being screened. But I believe they are supposed to be being screened now by that act. So I've got another question. I see, Elizabeth, you've got your hand up. So let me take a look here. Boy, we've got some great questions today. And I've got 1 minute. So let me see here. Hold on. Maybe we'll stay on a little longer here. Is there a current policy from the Department of Defense for the respective issues from gambling? Peter, what I know of, and maybe I need to do a little bit of more research, is that National Defense Authorization Act that Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts you know, got onto got onto that particular bill or act. So she got that signed, and it states that all military personnel are supposed to be getting screened for gambling disorder. But I will tell you, and it's not just for Marie's question, which is out of Illinois. I've heard from different states, they were unsure. The folks that work at the I've got to be careful here, but I'm unsure of if that's being carried out. I hope so. All I can go by is what I'm seeing here from what I've seen with this recent National Defense Authorization Act. I've got some other questions. Let's see. I'll try to answer one more. We're at an hour. And if I can find out anything else, guys, on this, I will definitely let you know. And Marie, you have my email address. Perhaps we can take this conversation offline. I just want to thank everybody for everybody's questions. And I hope today's information was helpful for you. It wasn't really a clinical training, right? We got our clinical training in last week with Dr. David Ledgerwood. But look at weknowthefeeling.org for our next upcoming trainings, and you can register for them. Our webinars. I know Julie Hines has the next one on March 26th, where she's going to be talking about young adults gaming and gambling. And I do believe I'm going to check. I think Dr. Ledgerwood is due at the 1st of April, and then I'm going to do one on April 21st. Speaking of suicide, I'm going to talk about suicide and the dangers tied to problematic gambling behaviors and gambling disorder. Okay. So listen, I want to thank everybody for all your questions. I'll check these questions. If I find out anything else on these, I can send out an email. And if you have any questions, you have my email. Please ask away. And Marie, we can continue our conversation, offline. Okay. So everybody have a great day, and thank you for being on.